everyone, this Children's Corner Louise is super sweet and easy, a perfect pattern for a beginner, and honestly, it's probably my new favorite pattern. The shape of the collar is just so delightful. And that is Audrey playing in the background. So anywho, you'll have 2 bodice front pieces to cut out on the fold, as well as 4 bodice back pieces. Then you'll have 4 collar pieces, and I have this velvet piping that matches the velvet for the bodice. And everything is linked below as always. And finally, you have your skirt pieces, or piece. You'll see what I mean later on, since I'm just using one large piece of this silk dupanier, if I said that correctly, for my skirt. I'm a huge fan of the no side seams whenever possible. And can we talk about this silk? Seriously, I am living. I've had my eye on this stuff for about 2 years, but it's a larger pattern, so it's not the best for like baby-sized clothing. So I'm finally able to use it on Audrey's skirt now that she's a toddler. I just love the colors, and it would be great from a toddler dress all the way to an adult dress and everything in between. I am so in love. Anywho, to begin, you'll take your bodice front and match it up with the bodice back at the shoulder seams. Then you'll stitch those together, and you can iron open those seams, and you'll repeat the same thing for the lining. If you were to omit the collar, then you would sew the 2 together now. But I think the collar is precious, so I'm taking 2 collar pieces, putting them right sides together, and I moved my needle over 2 spaces, so I would have a 1/4 inch seam from where my presser foot edge was when it was lined up at the raw edge of the collar. It just makes things easy. I sew around the curve carefully, just putting my needle down, turning, needle down, turning over and over and over until you're around those curves. Then I trimmed up that seam a smidgen, and can we take a second to talk about the lighting improvement in this video? I was able to order a big ring light thanks to my patrons over on Patreon. Patrons over on Patreon. Anyway, I am loving the creamy improvement, and I really appreciate my Patreon. Just a shameless plug, starts at $1 a month if you would like to support my channel. So I turn the collar right sides out and kind of press that seam out with my fingers before ironing it flat. Now, since you really don't want to have a gap between the collars, an easy way to avoid this is to baste the 2 collars together and kind of zigzag over that seam allowance area. So in my case, the seam allowance is a 1/4 inch, so I'm going over that area just before and after the 1/4 inch to make sure you cover that whole range, and going over it with a large zigzag. Next, I lined up the center front of the bodice with the center front of the collar. I sewed around the neckline to baste that in place. Once my collar was basted in place, then I sandwiched it between the dress front and the lining, matching up those shoulder seams. Then you'll sew down one center back around the neckline and down the other center back. You'll also sew around each armhole. Then you can trim up those seams and clip the curves as needed. Clipping the curves allows that smaller diameter to open up so it can kind of match up to the larger diameter. So basically, if your neckline or armholes have this undesired pulled look to them and they won't lay flat, you need to clip the curves more. You need to, yeah, Henry's finally look at me. Then I grabbed one back bodice section and pulled it through the front of the dress to turn it right sides out, and I just repeat the same process to the other side. And honestly, it wasn't the easiest thing to do with velvet, but it is doable. It just do it in little bits and it will work out. It's not super bulky. Then I took this little pointer tool, and it is linked below, and I used that to push the corners out into a nice neat point. And then I gave everything a really good ironing, and I find it easiest to iron the bodice first and then iron down the collar. Oh, and I just ripped out those little zigzag basting stitches and then trimmed them up. So next, I cut some of that velvet piping to length and sewed it to the bodice front as well as the bodice backs. And when you do those backs, you'll just angle the piping off and leave a little bit, so when I sew the lining of the bodice down by hand later on, that lining will enclose those raw edges of the piping, and it'll just look a smooth transition. And the iron crease mark from earlier, those just do like a really good job of marking where to angle off that piping. Finally, I took the bodice of the dress and sewed the side seams right sides together, and I'm just kind of turning it onto itself so those right sides are together. That way both the seams are touching each other and hidden from the dress front as well as the lining sides. I hope all of that's making sense. And no, even though I'm using white thread, you won't be able to see it. Whenever possible, I just use white thread since it's easier on so many levels. It's just one thing to buy, one thing to keep in stock, one thread to keep on your machine. You get my drift. I will switch on the weights of my white thread, but I kind of stick to white as whenever I can. So I trimmed up that piping, and then I could set the bodice aside and move on to that skirt. And can we talk about how delicious this fabric is? I just can't get over it. I am in love, everyone. So anywho, so I took one panel from the selvage edge to the selvage edge. I believe it's around 60 inches wide, but I can't quite, it might be 56 inches. It's somewhere around 60 inches wide. And you could definitely put in box pleats on the skirt. I think I will do that with a spring look with this pattern, but for now I'm just putting in 2 rows of gather stitches on the top of the skirt. 1 row on either side of where your permanent stitches will go later on. And okay, I made a super easy placket taking advantage of that selvage edge still being intact. With silk diplomat yarn, or really any silk, I try to keep as many edges as intact as possible, because it will fray on you. So here I just sewed down the center back, starting a few inches from the top of the skirt. That way you've got a placket of about 3 inches opening or something like that. And then for the placket, what I'll do is I'll just turn the right side under and iron that in place, and then I'll sew it with the right side under, and I'll just leave the left side flat. I won't fold that side. And then I gather up that skirt so it fits the bodice, and I will pin it just to the outside of the bodice. So I will leave that bodice lining out. And then I sew along, attaching the bodice to the skirt. And once that was done, I pulled out the visible gather thread and fold the raw edge of that bodice lining under about 1/2 inch and iron that in place. And I will hand sew that folded edge down later. So finally I turned up the bottom edge of the hem about 1/2 inch, and again until it met one of those squares. But you could do so many different hem options here. Seriously, lace, trim, Madeira hem, whatever floats your boat. It is sewing, y'all. You do you. And this was my finished dress once I had that hand sewing done, put some snaps in as closures for that back opening, and hem my dress by hand. I hope this video was helpful. If y'all have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time. Henry, you were so quiet. What's up with that? You were so quiet. Yeah, you're not gonna say anything to the peeps? They're gonna miss hearing from you. Nothing, not a squiggle, a giggle, nothing. All the little babies are bouncing, bouncing. All the little babies are... There you go. Mwah.